Let's speak to a political analyst now, Mr. Xolani Dube, joining us via Zoom. Mr. Dube, good morning to you and welcome to the agenda.
Let me humble myself to you, Nalete, as well as to the viewers.
No, we really appreciate your time. I think what you've heard some of the view from a lot of the opposition political parties that are outside this Cape Town City Hall right now about what their priorities are going to be. And I know that you obviously have scanned even social media and heard what South Africans are saying. What do you make about the tone, though, of the country going into this State of the Nation address? Do you think there is optimism and great expectation for the president by South Africans?
Look, there is one guy by the name of Kaka who told us, or who's telling us that we have to take into cognizance the realities that we live in rather than the ideas that we aspire. The fact of the matter is, Naledi, we have to accept that we as South Africans, primarily South African natives, we are not in charge of this country. We are not ruling this country. We are not governing this country. And so it would be absurd of us to expect people who are powerless to make changes or to have powers to change the path of this country. We have to know, you know very well, that South Africa is just an extension of what we call it, the British and the European interest that one can say is a new Bermuda Trial of neo-imperialism. And so we can speak as much as we want. We don't have power. We are not governing this country, and people who are governing this country, they don't have interest of the South African citizen and mainly of the South African natives. And so the bucket wish list that we have, to be quite honest, will remain the wish list, and it will never become a reality. We've been witnessing for the past 30 years.
Well, we can talk about 30 years, and of course that really expands the discussion to a bigger one. And I think what I'd like to do is just focus in on today, because otherwise we'll be here all day. This evening, the president to take that podium, you've got the EFF saying that they're going to be disrupting the proceedings at the State of the Nation address. Nothing new there. We've certainly seen the EFF do that again. But what does the president then say today that can restore the confidence of South Africans?
We don't have the president. We don't have the political parties, because political parties are there to make changes. The presidents in different countries are there to make changes. And we had Thabo Mbeki, we had Jacob Zuma, now we have Cyril. And all these political parties and people, ordinary people, are telling you, Naledi, and the viewers at home, that South Africa has not changed a bit since 1994. And so even the choreograph or the theatric that you'll be witnessing today, those are the things that shows our powerlessness, And so I think the real discussion is to say, how do we deconstruct the whole thing here in South Africa before we can talk about the State of the Nation address? Because even the concept nation, we are not a nation, you know it very well. And so that's why I'm saying this whole thing, we took a baton, or we took a script from the previous government of apartheid and of the Union of South Africa, and we want to implement in a democratic South Africa, inverted commas. But we find this contradiction, and hence you and I, we would like to have this narrative that the president will be speaking. These are the expectations on energy, on economy, on labor, and so we've been talking about this. But the fact of the matter is we are still trapped on the reality that we don't have power. We can't make changes.
Unfortunately,
and so the president will ascend to the podium. But he knows very well himself that he's not going to make any changes.
Mr. Dube, this evening you are going to have the pomp and ceremony, right? you're going to have the 21-gun salute, the singing of the national anthem outside the city hall. Really, the exercise of that, we're told, is to bring together the three arms of state and to have that very patriotic moment. Are you saying that that moment will not be felt by South Africans? I think before we even get to the speech and its contents itself, the bigness of this evening is also that moment of celebrating the three arms of state, the beginning of what one could call the political calendar, and certainly that patriotic moment before.
Look, we have to accept that 1994, Naledi, was a kind of a political construct by the business sector and the black political elite. Hence, you see, even today in our country, we talk about the polarization in our society. We talk about racism. We talk about the inequality. We talk about how apartheid divided us, as well as colonialism. And so these things that we'll be witnessing, these are the ceremonies of the elite. We have seen these things have been happening before, during apartheid, during colonialism, where as the South African natives, we're not part of those things. And so I don't understand why we have to accept things that we're not part of before. The fact of the matter that we need to discuss, all of us as South Africans, before these ceremonies of the aristocrats of our country, is to say, how do we relate to each other as South African? How do we debunk, or how do we reconstruct South Africa, a South Africa that is inclusive? Because what we'll be witnessing is supposed to be a celebration of a nation. But the fact of the matter is, if we go to our G coefficient, if we have people who can't afford the food, the basic food basket in our country, if we have about more than 3/4 of our population still survive on 350, and if in our country women and children are not free, what kind of a society we are? That's why I'm saying that we need to have a serious conversation, not concentrating on this peacocking or on these aristocratic ceremonies. The basic things, a child in Milnerton, a white child in Milnerton or in Constantia or in what we call it in Sentin, must have a relationship with a child in Deep Slough. They must have a common vision. But if we're not going to have, we are still going to have.
Yes, go ahead. Okay, I don't know why you stopped there, Mr. Dube, but I'm going to come in and use that opportunity where you stopped then to bring in a question.
There was an interference. There was an interference.
Yes, that must be a technical glitch, and we apologize for that. Sometimes wires get crossed, but I'm going to take advantage of the gap that you've given me there, if you'll allow me. You do have the reality that 2024 is a big year for the country, certainly for the president as well. We're going into these national and provincial elections next year, and I think one of the sentiments I've heard a lot, certainly on social media, has been this today being a big moment for South Africans really to start making their decisions about what they're going to do in 2024. Is there something that can happen today that you think will guide South Africans in making that decision as we get closer and closer? We are just over a year before we get to those elections.
Look, as I'm saying, this democracy is flawed, because democracy is about the will of the people, and the government is for the people, by the people. If you can ask people in shacks, if you can ask people in township, even in suburbs, and ask them, are you really have a participation, a meaningful participation in the development of our policies, in the development of this important State of the Nation address? They will tell you that, look, we are not active participants, but we are being made docile to be the recipient of information that comes from the so-called the elites of our society. People that you have interviewed since 6 o'clock this morning, they are crying about employment. They are crying about crime. They are crying about things that you have been crying about for the past 30 years. And so the question that we have to ask ourselves, if for each and every year, when it is time of the State of the Nation address, we keep on saying one and the same thing, really, is it worth it to have this government that is not listening to the people? That's why I'm saying State of the Nation address in other countries is a celebratory, is like a manifesto of collectiveness of citizens who say, together in this financial year, this is what we are going to do. But look, we as South Africans, we can simply put a disclaimer to this State of the Nation address, because this State of the Nation address is not talking to us, but we know it very well that it's not even a propaganda, but it's just lies from people who are powerless.
Yeah, I think just one last question, and we're going to keep this one brief. And you talk about the powerlessness and even the disillusionment of South Africans. I could easily argue to you that disillusionment is not a reason to not participate in our democracy, and we can go back and forth with that, which I think we've done sufficiently this morning. But just before I let you go, a lot of the tweets saying, I'm not going to be watching the State of the Nation address. What do you say to that South African who simply has no interest in watching it?
Look, I won't blame them. But what I would like to encourage them is that they must organize themselves in their communities. Last night, there was a discussion by so-called Safe Democracy. We needed these discussions in our communities where ordinary people will start to create spaces of conversation on how can we take this country forward, rather than to accept and wait for the manifestos from people who have failed us for the past 30 years. And maybe this discussion in our community, these are the discussions that will really craft the new South Africa that all of us have been waiting for since 1994. But if we're not going to do that, and if the media is still going to interview us about the State of the Nation address, about Cyril Ramaphosa, about Julius Malema, we are suppressing the innovation and the true discourse that must emerge from the people.
Yeah, you're calling me out as well there, but thank you so much for your time. Mr. Dube, really a pleasure speaking to you.